President Trump is under fire for using the R word to describe Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. However, the bigger story here is the $1 billion fraud scheme that the governor allegedly is trying to cover up. Let's talk about it. How's everybody doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today we got to talk about the $1 billion fraud scheme in Minnesota that the governor Tim Walz is allegedly trying to cover up. Now, this is a really big story, a lot of moving parts. Who does it involve? We already know who it involves. It's mostly your Somali immigrants to the state. Rampant waste, fraud, and abuse happening, and it's just being let go. Tim Walz is allegedly trying to do things to cover it up, silence whistleblowers. There's a lot. Now, President Trump, for some reason, appears to be the focal point of the story because of what he said on Truth Social, using the R word to describe him. That's just the media trying to obfuscate the real issue. They want to use Trump to say, hey, focus on him. Look over there. Don't look over here. All this waste, fraud, abuse, all these criminal actions. Don't look at that. Don't look at whistleblowers being silenced. Don't look at our guy, the Democrat, Tim Walz, somehow being at fault. Don't worry about that. Focus on what Trump said. Now, before I get to anything, let's get to what Trump said. And of course, I will link to this and everything else in the description. If you're on IG, Facebook, etc., visit a link in the bio, go to the corresponding article on the website. But without further ado, let's go ahead and roll it.
In that same post, you mentioned Tim Walz, and you called him what many Americans do find inoffensive or retarded. Do you stand by that claim of calling Tim Walz retarded?
Yeah, I think there's something wrong with him. Absolutely, sure.
But you don't think that
you have a problem with him? You know what? I think there's something wrong with him. Anybody that would do what he did, anybody that would allow those people into a state and pay billions of dollars out to Somalia. We give billions of dollars to Somalia. It's not even a country because it doesn't function like a country. It's got a name, but it doesn't function like a country. Yeah, there's something wrong with Walz.
Now, I agree. There is something wrong with Walz. And what he said about Somalia is the truth. Shout out to the Somalis out there if you're watching. Okay, you're the captain now. Okay, fantastic. But Somalia, really, the government is not really there. It's just the truth. It's just a reality. It's unfortunate, but it's the truth. Now, Trump and the White House doubled down on that. You can see this right here on whitehouse.gov. Yes, I'll link to it in the box. And you can see the headline. Yes, there's something wrong with Walz, and it costs taxpayers $1 billion. Okay, so we can see what's going on here. I'm going to just read this bolded part. Nowhere is that more evident than the shocking fraud scandal that took place under the incompetence of deeply disturbed Democrat Governor Tim Walz, in which 78 of the 86 individuals charged so far are of Somali ancestry. Okay, so look, dozens of individuals, largely of East African descent, looted taxpayers out of over $1 billion that was intended for child food assistance and what amounted to the country's largest pandemic relief fraud scheme. That's the truth. Also, fun fact, when you're talking about welfare benefits, Minnesota, #1 in the entire country. Not California, not some big place like that. It's super liberal. Minnesota, #1. All right. Now, let's get to a news clip. It's going to be from News Nation. Of course, again, it will be in the box if you want to see it and hear it without my commentary. If you're on IG, Facebook, etc., you know where it's at. Let's go ahead and roll it.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has come under fire. Hundreds of social service workers publicly are blaming him for a massive fraud scandal that's been rocking the welfare system in the state. Staff at Minnesota Human Services Department say widespread false billing allegedly funneled more than $1 billion in taxpayer funds to nonprofits that are tied to the Somali community. Now, they claim Walz ignored their warnings, even punished whistleblowers. Officials now are still uncovering how deep the fraud went and whether any of the money may have reached terror groups overseas.
Let's pause. Now, it's one thing to have fraud go on and maybe you don't catch it. Maybe you don't know. It kind of, flies under the radar. But if you are aware of it and you make efforts to try and silence anyone from coming forward and saying anything about it, see, now you are part of it. You are part of the scheme yourself.
Investigative correspondent Rich McHugh has been all over this story, really from the jump, as they say. Joins us now. What's the governor's office saying about these new developments?
Hi, Connell. Well, we asked, and the governor's office isn't formally commenting on these posts that were posted onto X as of yesterday by allegedly hundreds of DHS, Minnesota DHS workers. I'll read some just because they're stunning in the rebuke of Governor Walz. Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on, hoping for a partnership in stopping fraud, but no, we got the opposite response. They continue. Tim Walz systematically retaliated against whistleblowers using monitoring, threats, repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. Instead of partnership, we got the full weight of retaliation. It's scary, isolating, and left us wondering who we can turn to. Now, in an interesting development, this afternoon, that account was suspended from X for a period of hours, but then put back online. There was a lot of outcry as a commentary account and under a slightly different name with the same amount of followers. We asked the Department of Health Human Services, in Minnesota, to confirm if they are associated with this in any way, and they said they could not. What is not in question here, Connell?
So what are they saying? They're saying they can't confirm or deny whether it's them or not? I think that's them, because if it wasn't them, then they'd put out a statement and say, that account is not associated with us. We did not put that out. That's fake, all this and that. Because you don't want to do something like that, have your name attached to it, and then you get caught up in some kind of lawsuit or something like this. So I think that is them. And if it's not an official account, meaning the DHS bosses make the account, it's employees who are coming forward.
Is the amount of fraud. We're talking $1 billion in fraud that we've reported on. Governor was asked about it yesterday on Meet the Press. Take a listen.
Dozens of people of East African descent have been charged, convicted, and sentenced for stealing more than $1 billion in taxpayer money from government programs during COVID. As you know, Governor, that is more than Minnesota spends each year to run its Department of Corrections. So I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Before he answers the question, let's just make sure we're on the same page. So there's already been convictions. It's not an allegation that the fraud happened. The fraud happened, and most of the people that were involved are Somali. These are facts. It's written. I'll link to it in the box. You can see it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Always do your own independent research. The question is, did Tim Walz facilitate it by trying to squash anyone from coming forward and blowing the whistle and saying, hey, this fraud is happening. Hey, this money is going somewhere where it shouldn't be going. Hey, this money is not being used appropriately. Let's see his answer.
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy.
But that's not really the question. The question is, were you involved with trying to squash anyone from coming forward and blowing the whistle? That's the actual question. And you could say, oh, it's not about Somalis, when 90% of them were Somali. It is what it is.
Well, it's not just a few, Connell. We've talked to federal sources. They've confirmed it for us. Of the 86 that have been indicted so far, 79 of them are of Somali descent. So it's not a very small bunch. It's the majority of those who have been indicted to date. And
then my question would be, of those who are not Somali, what is their connection to the Somali community? Just like Ilhan Omar and her husband, Tim Mainet. If you're going to look at what they're doing as some kind of fraud, because let's talk about that for a minute, so I'm right here. Ilhan Omar got divorced from her brother, allegedly, and her actual husband that she had kids with, who she was not married to legally. They had an Islamic ceremony. She got divorced from both of those guys and then got really married to Tim Mainet, the campaign consultant, and 70% of all of Ilhan Omar's campaign money was paid to him as a consultant. And of course, since they're married, that money will come right back to Ilhan. So that could be considered some kind of fraud, potentially. Now, Ilhan is Somali and the husband is not, but it's all part of the same thing with the Somalis.
tell us this number is going to go up.
Okay, now I mentioned at the top this concern about maybe some of the money being transferred to groups overseas. What can you tell us, if anything, about that?
So we also have our own reporting on this. We talked to federal sources, both current, former, and also joint terrorism sources, who said, yes, this money makes its way to Somalia, and of that money, there's a cut of it that goes to an Al-Qaeda linked terror group, Al-Shabaab. They said we can't do a forensic accounting of it because we don't know once it's over there, but it's there for sure. And they were unequivocal about it. And when we talked to them, Connell.
So that's what's going on. Okay, that is what's going on. We see what's happening. You have monies from the USA that are meant for this food program, help needy kids or whatever, but ultimately, from what I'm able to read, from what I'm able to hear, the money is going to Somalia and ultimately going to the hands of terror groups like Al-Shabaab. That's not very good. Now, as I close, I want to say this. Tim Walz, I want to know what your involvement here is. I want to know what your involvement was with this whole scam. Because if you were involved in any kind of way, trying to cover it up, trying to silence whistleblowers, that's going to be a problem because now you have terror groups overseas being funded. Aside from the fraud, that's bad enough. But the fraud funded terror groups. So we most certainly can't be doing that here in the good old US of A. And I think I'll leave that right there for now. And what say you? What's your opinion about this whole situation? Do you think Tim Walz was involved in trying to silence whistleblowers? Do you think this money was taken to fund overseas activity? I mean, they already said it. It's like, look, some of the money went to Al-Shabaab. We can't really trace it because, but it's going over there. What do you think the money is being used for? Just for random everyday living expenses, for terror groups, for trying to build that non-existent country into a country? Whatever your thoughts are, let me know in the comments below. You guys know where I'm at. The fraud is real. The waste is real in a place like Minnesota. Aside from this particular issue with the fraud going to Somalia, there's an issue with welfare benefits just being showered upon Minnesota. For what? What's the actual benefit? What is the gain that this money showered upon this state has produced in the state? I love to hear anybody tell me. But whatever your thoughts are, please let me know in the comments below. And that's all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.